Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. Before we go straight into today's case, I do have to give you guys a couple of content warnings. In this video, we do talk about domestic abuse, suicide, and this case is also about children. So if that's not something you think you're interested in watching, then this video probably isn't for you. So maybe you can watch some of my other videos or just wait for my next upload. For today's case, we're going all the way to Rustenburg, which is my hometown. Jannie Beukes was born on the 6th of October 1963 in Johannesburg, and throughout his schooling career he played both rugby and wrestling. He then went to the army in Cape Town and finished his service in 1984. Then afterwards he did his apprenticeship at Spoornet as a fitter in Germiston, and then in 1994 he then started working in the mines in Rustenburg. He met Helga in 1988 and they met at a wrestling club that he was a part of because some of Helga's older brothers were also part of the same club. And Jannie says from the first moment he saw Helga, he fell in love. He was actually supposed to marry someone else, I think a couple of months before they met, but after they met, he told her this, and he also told her that he was never going to propose to a woman again. Like, if someone wanted to marry him, they had to propose. So she asked him, like, if I were to propose to you, would you say yes? And he said yes. And about 3 weeks later, the two of them got married, and at this point, he was 26 and Helga was about 19 or 20. Not too long after they got married, Helga found out that she wouldn't be able to have children, which was very sad. But a couple of years later, on the 16th of November 1990, their first child was born and they named her Mirinda. It's said that she was a daddy's girl and she also had bright blue eyes like her father. 4 years later, on the 9th of November 1994, their second child was born and they named him Skalk Benjamin, and he was a bit cheeky and he also loved cars. Despite Jannie's claim that they had a happy relationship, it didn't seem like that. He was very controlling, and it is believed this was because he was older than Helga. Helga was still very young when they did get married. He was also physically abusive. Sometimes Helga would leave the house and she would pack her bags up and Jannie would physically bring her back home. She would also break up with him multiple times, and when she would break up with him, she would leave the house and go stay with her mom or maybe another friend, and she would take the children with her, and Jannie would still try and make the effort to go see his children even though they weren't staying in the same house, but this would never stay for long and they would always go back home. The fifth and final time that Helga broke up with Jannie, it would unfortunately lead to the tragic events of today's case. Jannie also claims that Helga would cheat on him, and he says that he is sure of it. He's sure that she was cheating on him, and he also says that she would also accuse him of cheating on her, but he says that never happened. Jannie also says that looking back, he should have left her the first time that she cheated on him, or when their marriage started seeming like it wasn't going to be that good, and he regrets not leaving. But he says he also doesn't believe in divorce, which is why he stayed. But it's also like, she tried leaving you 5 times and you would never let her leave, you know? Jannie also claims that Helga was a pretty heavy drinker, and he says that he never drank, and sometimes she would drink so much that she wouldn't be able to go to work, and he would threaten her and tell her that he didn't care how drunk she was and he would still take her to work. Like, he'd put her in the car, drive her to work, drop her off, and he really didn't care. In 1999, Helga finally decided to file for divorce, and she had met someone else and started dating this person who coincidentally also worked at the same mine that Jannie worked at, and she had moved out of their marital home and moved in with this man, and Mirinda and Skalk were also staying with this man. So the area that Helga and Jannie stayed in was part of a mining area, so all the houses in that area were all mining houses. And after they had separated, Jannie moved in with his neighbor. His name was Hendrik, who stayed next to them. And whilst he was staying with Hendrik, he went to go see his other neighbor, and he just wanted to ask her for some advice because he didn't know what to do. So he told this neighbor that he didn't like his children staying with Helga. He hated it. It's not something that he wanted. He wanted them to stay with him. And he also told this neighbor that on one occasion, Helga had left the children to stay with her boyfriend's sister-in-law, who the children did not know, and this really upset him. So this neighbor just advised him to go to the CMR offices and talk to the chief about the situation, so maybe they could help him. But apparently the people at the offices told him that he didn't have a leg to stand on because Helga was the children's mother, and if she left them with someone else, it didn't matter as long as the children were supervised, and he really couldn't do anything. And after he left these offices, he was so angry and he was just so upset because he felt like he couldn't do anything, and he really didn't want Helga having the children. On the 22nd of January 2000, Jannie picked up Miranda and Skalk because they were going to be spending the night with him, and he decided to take them to Rustenburg, which is kind of like a hotel resort kind of thing with swimming pools and where kids can go and have fun. So that day the children were swimming, they were playing around, and it seemed like a really good day. And whilst Jannie was just watching them play, he got really sad, so he decided to sit under a tree and he started crying. He then says after he started crying, Miranda went up to him and asked him what was wrong and why he was crying, and he told her that he was sad because their mother wanted to divorce him. Apparently after this, Miranda told him that their mom, Helga, told her that after the divorce was finalized, they wouldn't be able to call Jannie dad anymore. And then she also told Jannie that her mom's boyfriend would hit her and her little brother with a belt sometimes. And after this, he got really sad and he got really upset, and he just started questioning things and wondering what was going to happen to the children after the divorce was finalized. The next day, around 5 in the morning, Hendrik heard what he thought was a gunshot. He immediately got out of bed and he started searching the house, and then he went to the room that Jannie was staying in. As soon as he opened the door, he saw that Jannie had a wound in his mouth and he was just bleeding profusely. After this, he ran to his neighbor's house and asked for help, and once they got back to the house, they went to the room that Jannie was in, and this is when they realized that it wasn't a burglary like they first thought, and Jannie had actually tried to commit suicide. As soon as they realized this, they started thinking about the children, about Miranda and Skalk, and they started asking him where the children were. But because he had this wound in his mouth, he couldn't speak. So the two of them started searching around the house, looking everywhere, trying to find Miranda and Skalk, but they couldn't find the two children. Afterwards, they ran back into the room and they started shouting at Jannie, telling him to tell them where the children were. And all he could do was just hold his mouth and point straight. He just kept pointing and pointing and pointing, and they didn't know what he was pointing at. And then they looked carefully and they noticed that he was pointing towards the bed. They then ran to the bed and they pulled the covers down, and this is where they found the bodies of 9-year-old Miranda and 5-year-old Skalk Benjamin, and they were both cold to the touch. It turned out that Jannie had strangled both of his children and broken their necks. He had also put a bomb cracker in his mouth, which is just a type of firecracker, and he had lit it up, and when it went off it sounded like a gunshot, which is what Hendrik heard. Immediately, police officers and an ambulance were called, and they arrived at Hendrik's house, and they put Jannie in the ambulance so he could go to the hospital to get the necessary treatment that he needed. And whilst he was in the ambulance waiting for it to take off, one of the neighbors ran up to him and asked him where Helga was and where she was staying. And at this point, Jannie just took a piece of paper and he wrote down her address, and then he was taken to the hospital. Police officers then fetched Helga later on during the day, and they brought her to Hendrik's house, but they didn't tell her anything. And when she got to the house, she just noticed that there were police everywhere and she couldn't enter Hendrik's property. And after this, a neighbor saw her and decided to take her to her home so she could tell Helga what happened. She then sat Helga down, and this is when Helga started asking them like what's going on, where her children were. And her neighbor just looked at her and told her that the children were in a better place, but she didn't know where they were. After this, Helga just held the chair very tightly, and you could see that she was so upset, and she immediately stood up and ran out of the back door. But she then suffered from an asthma attack, and they had to call an ambulance for her as well. It's said that once news broke out that Jannie had murdered his children, everyone was completely shocked because they couldn't believe that this father that seemed like he loved his children so much would kill his children with his bare hands and break their necks. Nobody could believe it. Jannie survived his suicide attempt and spent a couple of weeks in hospital, and once he was discharged, he was immediately taken to the Rustenburg prison. And this is when Helga decided to go visit him, and once she saw him, she had just one question for him, and that was why he would murder their children. And he just looked at her and said, "Don't ask me, you know why this happened." Jannie ended up pleading guilty, but the state still had to gather more evidence just to make sure that they had an airtight case and just had all their ducks in a row. And finally, 3 years after Jannie had killed his children in July 2003, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murders of Marinda and Skalk Benjamin Beukes, 2 years for each children, and the sentences would run concurrently with a suspended sentence of 5 years. So basically he would only spend 15 years in prison, and he was supposed to be released in 2018. However, he did get parole and was released earlier than that, and Jannie Beukes is out living his life. There is a series on Showmax called Huisgenoot, Ware Lewensdramas, Vlees and Bloed. As you can tell, it is in Afrikaans, but there are English subtitles, and there you can watch Jannie tell like his side of the story, which is why in this case it's just mostly his side and his upbringing, because Helga wasn't a part of the documentary. I'm not too sure why, but I hope wherever she is, she's healing and she's just happy. I try not to put my comments in my videos, like my own personal feelings. I don't do a good job, but I really try. But this documentary just made me, this series, like this episode just made me really upset, because you could tell that Jannie still blamed Helga for the children's death. Like, yes, he did say that he should be sentenced, he should go to jail, but he still blamed Helga for it and said like if she hadn't left him, then he wouldn't have killed the kids, which shouldn't have been the case. Like, this man was physically abusing her. Even like during the series, like he tried to brush it, like just brush over it lightly. Like he was just like, you know, we had our ups and downs. Like, yeah, I'd hit her like once every now and then. Like, he's trying to make it seem like it's not a big thing, and he's just trying to make himself seem like a victim and also like remorseful. But I don't know. I just think he should have gotten longer than 15 years for killing his 2 children. But and that's it for today's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.